Good evening, everybody. I'm Heather Busby with NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, and we're so excited that you could join us for our first webinar in what we anticipate will be a series of webinars during this 85th legislative session, which kicks off tomorrow. So tonight we have for you Lege 101, which is an introduction to Texas state government and how a bill becomes a law in Texas, and some basics about the legislature. And we'll look at having a Lege 201 coming up probably next month. We'll let you know when we set that date. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping things. One is that you all should be muted through the system and will remain muted throughout so that we're not listening to folks driving in their car or doing their dishes or dogs barking in the background and things like that, and you can all hear the webinar. We are going to remain muted throughout the call, and at any time in the chat window, if you're using your computer, you can go ahead and chat your questions in that window. The only ones who can see it are us here at the staff on our organizer end, so don't worry, say whatever you'd like. Any feedback is appreciated. And after the webinar is over, we will be sending a recording. So it is recording right now, and we'll send that out to everyone who is participating and everyone who signed up for this webinar. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So tonight your presenters are me. I'm the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, and I've been with the organization for a little over 4 years now. This will be my third legislative session, and it is never boring. We also have Alexa Garcia Dita, who is our Communications and Policy Initiatives Director. This is her first session with NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, but she has covered the legislature, 4 legislatures actually, in her previous employment as a journalist and with the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And we also have Blake Rocap, who is our legislative counsel, who has covered now 6 legislative sessions. So I'm clearly the newbie to the bunch here. And Blake has been advocating for us at the Capitol for many sessions and is going to continue to do so this session. So we're really excited to have Alexa and Blake here tonight to talk to you. So I'm going to go ahead and move along with our agenda this evening. So we're going to start off, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the leadership in the state of Texas and the legislature, the makeup of the legislature. And then Blake's going to jump in and get into the real meat and potatoes of this webinar, talking about how lawmaking happens in Texas, how a bill becomes a law, how you research and track bills using the online tools that the legislature provides, and how laws are implemented once they're passed. And then Alexa's going to talk to you and give you some pointers about how you should interact with your elected representatives and senators, and some pointers for testifying at committee hearings. And then we'll take questions and answers through the chat function. So just 1 minute, we'll get started. Okay, so Texas Government 101. You know, we have a governor, I don't know if you've heard, and a Texas legislature. We have the House of Representatives and the Texas Senate are the 2 chambers of our legislature. The lieutenant governor, who some say is actually more powerful than the governor, and we'll get into that in a minute, and the Speaker of the House. Those folks comprise our statewide leadership. Our governor is Greg Abbott. He was elected in 2014. He is elected statewide by the people of Texas and is the chief executive for the state. There are several ways in which he participates in the legislature, and that is primarily by setting the priorities for the session. He can also designate emergency items, which would kick in some special procedures to help bills move more quickly through the legislature. He works behind the scenes to push bills through or stop bills, or give advice here and there to lawmakers. And once bills are passed, he can either veto or sign them, or do neither of those things, and they would go into effect even without his signature after a certain number of days. He also has the power to call special sessions, and he makes some agency appointments, which is really important once you get into the implementation of bills once they become law. We have our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who announced today that he will be running for re-election for Lieutenant Governor in 2018. He is also elected statewide to a 4-year term by the people of Texas, and has a very powerful position within the legislature. It's really one of the most, or the most powerful position in the legislature. The Lieutenant Governor is president of the Senate. They control all the bills being heard and passed in the Senate, dictates the order of the bills, and can decide if there's an event of a tie, which in our current legislature rarely happens, if ever. Then we have the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House, unlike the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor, is not elected statewide by the people of Texas, but is elected, chosen from the membership of the Texas House of Representatives. So the representatives that you elect choose their speaker at the beginning of the legislative session. The Speaker presides over the Texas House and decides parliamentary questions, assigns bills to committees, assigns and appoints committees and the committee heads, and may vote but usually abstains. The Speaker is an actual representative that's elected by his or her district. Our current Speaker is Joe Strauss, who has been our Speaker since 2009. So the legislature, 2 chambers, our Senate and our House. The Senate has 31 members who are elected to 4-year terms, and the House is comprised of 150 members who are elected to 2-year terms. The legislature is part-time. We only have a legislative session every other year in odd-numbered years for 140 days, with the exception of special sessions that may be called by the governor that last for 30 days at a time. Currently, there is a Republican majority in the Texas legislature. We have 95 Republicans to 55 Democrats in the House, 20 Republicans to 11 Democrats in the Senate. It's important to note for us, for purposes of this call, that not our Democrats are pro-choice. And that we currently do not have any openly pro-choice Republicans, but we do have one small exception, a representative out of Houston, who often votes the right way when these anti-abortion bills make it to the floor. The only bill that must pass each session according to the Texas Constitution is the General Appropriations Act, which is more commonly known as the budget. So our political landscape, Texas, as we know, is a quite diverse population. More than 50% of the state is female. We have almost half the state are Hispanic or Latino. And we have 12% African American and 4% Asian population in the state of Texas. However, in the legislature, it is much more male and white. We have 39 women in both the House and the Senate total, versus 43 in 2009 to compare from the recent past. And 65% of the legislature those lawmakers are white. So I'm going to pass it over to Blake to talk about how a bill becomes a law in Texas.
Thanks, Heather. Good evening, everyone. As Heather mentioned, the only bill that really must pass is the budget, so that the state knows how to spend our tax dollars over the next 2 years. And that's important to remember because the process is set up to not really pass any other bills because they have to go through multiple steps in order to get to the governor's desk. And usually there's about 6,000 different measures filed, and only about 1,000 of those will pass both chambers. So in order for a bill to become a law, it has to be filed by a member of the legislature and can originate in either chamber, but has to go through a committee process in both chambers and has to pass by a majority vote in both chambers, and then the chambers have to agree upon the exact language of the new law to send to the governor's desk. So there's lots of different areas where bills can stop, including they can be not voted out of a committee. They could be voted out of a House committee, make it all the way through the House process, go to the Senate, and then not be voted out of the Senate committee, or then not brought up by the lieutenant governor. So there's lots of different ways that bills can be stopped, and that's one of the things that we'll be calling on you to help us do is reach out to those committee members or those committee chairmen that have some influence over which bills continue in the process, and ask them, not to keep the bill moving forward, that you don't want it to become law. The Texas Legislature Online, which is TLO, is a great resource for tracking bills, reading them, researching what has been filed, and all things related to the legislative session. There's lots of different ways to look up bills and research them and find things that you're interested in, and then also have it track the bills for you. You can make a list of all the bills that you're interested in, and it'll save it for you. It's really a handy resource, and I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to go to the website, which is www.legis.state.tx.us, and play around on the site and look at all the things it can show you. One of the easiest ways to look at stuff is by searching for a word or phrase. So in that, there's a drop-down box where you select which legislative session you want to search in. And this current legislative session that starts tomorrow will be the 85th regular legislative session. That's what that R stands for. And then you can search by word or phrase, or any of these other more advanced searches below it. So if we search for bills that have been filed with the word or phrase abortion, we get 17 different matches. So it brings up these are the results of that search, and you can then click on each of the links for each bill to find out more information about it. And this page shows you a little snapshot of what the caption is, which is a brief summation of what the bill is about and who the author is and the bill number. You can also, if you know a bill that you keep hearing about and want to search for, you can search for it by bill number by changing the radio button underneath the session drop-down box. So like you've been hearing about SB 6, which was introduced last week, which was Dan Patrick's bathroom bill, and you want to read that stuff to see how it compares to what they did in North Carolina, this is a place to start. But we're going to take a look at House Bill 746, which was a bill filed by our friend Representative Farrar that relates to the information that's in the Women's Right to Know booklet that physicians are required to give to their patients before they have an abortion. So when you get to a specific bill page, you have some information on this cover page. So the last action gives you a date and what happened, and that bill was filed. The next thing that'll happen is the bill will be read on the House floor for the first time, and then it will be referred to a committee. And that will happen for virtually every bill that gets filed. And that's only the very first steps in the process. If you want to see what the actual bill language is, you can click on the text tab at the very top instead of the history, and it'll give you an option to look at that text either in a Word document in your web browser, or download it as a PDF. So this is what the bill will look like. You see at the very top, it says the bill is by Farrar, and it's HB number 746. So HB means it's a House bill, and then it has a number, and those numbers are assigned numerically by the time they were filed, except for some very low number bills which are reserved numbers. So in reading a bill, it doesn't always give you the whole section of law that it relates to. So you'll notice this bill starts amending Section 171.002 of the Health and Safety Code and amends what the definition of sonogram is. So the highlighted language, and any language that is neither underlined nor struck through, is current law. And then any language that is added is underlined, and any language that is removed is struck through. So you can see in the very beginning of this bill, Representative Farrar has changed the definition of sonogram to be more medically accurate by removing the words unborn child and inserting the appropriate medical terminology of embryo or fetus. And this is a simple example, but it holds true for all of the bills, that there is current law in many of the bills, and then all the new stuff is underlined, and what's struck is, again, with the cross through. You can set up the Texas legislature online to track bills for you and create a bill list and inform you when anything happens to those bills, when they are set for a committee hearing, which is often the very next most important things that happen. Which committee they're referred to, and then if they're set for a hearing. It's easy to create a login and username, and that allows you a little bit more functionality on the website to do that. So when you're looking at a bill, you can click on the Add Bill to List link, and you can create the name of your list. You can enter the description of the bill, and then you can also enter any other comments that you have. That way, when you get your bill list report, you don't have to necessarily remember exactly what each bill does or why you're tracking it if you're trying to track multiple bills across different areas. You'll see on our bill tracker that we track abortion-related bills, bills related to contraception, access, and other bills related to other reproductive justice issues. So we can separate those into lists, or we can remind ourselves exactly what the differences are between similar bills by using those comments. So these are some bill trackers that Heather has set up. So it searches bills for abortion, for birth control, for family leave, for family planning, and she has different. And by running these lists, it'll provide her the list of bills that meet those descriptions. You can also add bills specifically to a bill tracker instead of having the TLO search bills for you, and then have a commentary there. So the two bills we've looked at was Senate Bill 20, which was the first bill that came up on our abortion search, and then House Bill 746. And you can see the comments that Heather has saved there on her list. And then this is the result of her bill list. She has these two bills added to her list. So she's created a simple list in order to track these two bills and called it abortion bills. Right. So on the list, you can see that it shows what the committee actions are, whether it's been referred to a House committee or a Senate committee, and then if that committee has taken any action on the bill, whether set it for a hearing or heard testimony and left it pending or has voted it out, then that action would appear right there. So you see on these bills, nothing's happened yet, so those aren't applicable. You also see the companion bills, that would be bills that are identical or similar to these bills in the other chamber. So it would be a House bill that contained the same language. You can also, instead of setting up your own legislative tracker, go to our website, in the resources drop-down box on the top menu to the 2017 Texas Legislature, and we'll have a tracker of all the bills we're tracking and what our position is on them, a little non-legalistic explainer of what it does and why we're opposed to it. And that should be going live tomorrow. You should all probably get an email sometime tomorrow with a special link to that, um, inviting you to come take a look at what's been filed thus far. There's lots of other all the digital access to the legislature is through this same TLO portal. So if you look on the shaded right-hand text box, there's a box for legislative activity. So you can view the video broadcasts. You can see all of the committee meetings and hearings that are happening for the day. You can see what's been voted on today on the floors of the chambers. And there's also some very useful resources down there. How a bill becomes a law, the TLO's instruction guide on how to follow a bill, different dates of the legislative session that become important as the session progresses, as far as deadlines that bills have to meet in order to be passed. And so some of those things that are most important are, being able to watch your legislature in action, both in committee hearings and on the House and Senate chamber floor. So you can follow the debate and make sure you know what your elected officials are doing. So that's a quick overview of what it takes for bills to become law and how you can follow that activity. The other thing that happens often is questions of implementation. That what does it mean when some bills pass and they change and affect the law? Many bills give the state agencies authority to write rules to implement them specifically. And that's sort of what we saw this summer. Those of you who've been following the Department of State Health Services amendments to the fetal and embryonic tissue disposition rules, that is basically the legislature saying, Department of State Health Services, you should make rules to make sure this is safe. And they did that in the early 80s. And then the department wrote rules and haven't changed them since 1989, and then decided that they would amend their rules. So that regulatory side is still has all of the full force of the state government behind it, and can make things basically illegal the same way that statute can, and that can prevent physicians from practicing medicine or whatever else, the revoke people's licenses, whatever the regulation concerns. And like we saw, those regulations and rules can be challenged just the same way statutes can be, and they can be used to clean up and clarify statutory language that's unclear. Now I will turn it over to Alexa to let you hear about good tips for talking and communicating with your legislators.
Thank you, Blake. Welcome everybody. I'm excited to give you guys some general tips when you are talking to your elected officials, both this session and beyond. I think the most important point that we want to make is the importance of relationship building, and not just, targeting your elected officials during the legislative session, but maintaining those relationships, going to events where they're speaking, talking to their staff during the interim, helping on their campaigns if they're running for re-election, attending events in your district so that you become a familiar face. And then by the time session rolls around, you your elected official knows who you are, knows what you care about, and is, ready to hear what you have to say and work with you here at the state capitol. So, relationships are key, and we just wanted to, uh, point out the value of maintaining those and building those outside of the legislative session, but of course, utilizing the next couple months. So, and when you're communicating with your lawmaker, it's important to know that you don't always have to come with a concrete ask. You can set up a meeting to just generally talk about an issue, to catch up, things like that. So don't feel like every time you interact with your elected official that you have to make a strong ask. Obviously, always, as I know you all will be respectful when communicating with your elected official and their staff. However we might feel inside about what we're talking about, hostility in a conversation doesn't do anyone any good. And of course, know your audience and do a little bit of research ahead of time so that which staff member is a policy expert in which area. Maybe learn a little bit about your elected official's family or what they like to do in the district so that you have some, personal connection to them as well. And it always helps to practice and be prepared and, have your research, done. And that's where we come in. If there's ever anything that you want us to help you prepare for a meeting with your elected official, or if you want some research or some data or just some general talking points, we're happy to provide that kind of information for you and those materials. But I definitely encourage you to do some homework before you go and start making your visits. When you are ready to make a specific ask of your elected official, you want to make sure that you are specific and that you're strong in your case, because, we all know that their attention is pulled a million different directions, but, you want your meeting to stand out. And so you want to be prepared, as I said, if you're comfortable having somebody else that there to just kind of, create a more conversational atmosphere, it's totally cool to take a friend. It's always best to keep your communication short and succinct, because again, they do have a lot going on and their staff is working round the clock during session especially. And so, you want to make your case clear and make sure that you're giving them as much information as you can so that they don't have to do a lot of extra work. And drawing on any personal stories or experiences that you want to share does tend to resonate with legislators and their staff, and of course sets you apart from other individuals who they may be talking to. So if that's something that you're comfortable doing, sharing a personal story, feel free to do so. We, help folks prepare their personal stories for legislator meetings or committee hearings quite a bit. And so that's something that we are prepared to help you guys do if that's something that you envision yourself doing this legislative session. I think, one of the more important, or of course you do want to be targeting your own elected officials. And early on, when you do reach out to them, make sure to point out you are a constituent, that you live in their district, and that you participated in their campaign if you did, or if you're involved locally, just so that they know that you did have a role in getting them there, and that you need to that your meeting or your story or your issue is important. So when you are approaching a friendly legislator, you want to establish a rapport and, let them know that you are thankful for their position on an issue, that you're here to support them. You're there to be a resource, to help them whatever capacity they may need. and that you're also going to be there when it's time for them to get reelected, or they have an event that they need supporters for, or any way that you can show that you are on their team and that you are supportive of their work and you're grateful of their work. It never hurts to reinforce that. And you want to, let them be the hero, so to speak, and really elevate them and their position. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to our issue, there are more unfriendly legislators than there are friendly. So, if you live in a district where someone is unfriendly to your issue, you, again, no matter what you may be feeling inside or what you're thinking in your head or what, how much you disagree with them, you just want to make sure that, you keep your hostility or, whatever feeling at bay. And remember that, staffers are not their bosses. So they don't necessarily agree with their boss's position on, say, reproductive rights. So you want to, have respect and, have a conversational tone when you're talking to staffers. And because, again, hostility doesn't get us anywhere, right? And, the same applies whether you're talking to a friendly or unfriendly legislator, to be specific in your ask, even if you, know that you're not going to get the response that you want. You might also, when you're there, you want your information and your position to be, you want to make sure that all that is recorded and that the staff is sharing your feedback with the member. You also, might want to encourage your friends and family who live in the same district to also reach out to your elected official's office, and, understand that they don't always prioritize communication from individuals who are not their constituents. So, this is, an example where we anticipate a lot of opportunities where we're going to need, y'all's help in reaching out to your individual electeds, whether we're trying to stop a bill like Blake described, or we really want to drum up support for something. So it's a good thing to keep their district contact information handy. That's something that we'll also provide you tools so that you can easily look up who your elected officials are and how to communicate with them, whether it's in their district office or here at the Capitol. So, like Blake mentioned, you can access, or all the hearings are live streamed and recorded, which you can access via Texas Legislature Online. But if you want to come and speak at these hearings in person down at the Capitol, there's the process for speaking at a House hearing and a Senate hearing. They're slightly different, so I'm just going to kind of walk through each one. When you are testifying at a House committee hearing, you will register at these iPad kiosks that they have. You'll type in your basic information and wait for the agenda item to come up during the meeting, and wait for the chairperson to call your name. When you testify at a House hearing, you will either be standing at a podium or sitting at a table. It just sort of depends on the committee room. And in the Senate, rather than register on an iPad, the Senate's a little more behind the times. You'll actually fill out a written witness card, and you'll turn it into the clerk before the hearing starts. And, once it's time for our agenda item to be taken up by the committee, the chairperson will call up 3 names, and you'll all go sit at a table, and then it's kind of a round robin type scenario. So you'll get called on by name. Whether you're testifying in a House or a Senate committee, you will have 3 minutes to testify, you'll definitely want to write out your remarks in advance and practice, because believe it or not, that 3 minutes goes by really quickly. And so you want to make sure that you get your full argument in the time allotted. You want to start, of course, by stating who you are and your position on whatever bill is before the committee. And you want to thank them for allowing you to testify that day. And, respect and brevity is our friend in these situations. It's always best to speak from the heart, especially, if you do have a very personal connection to the bill or the agenda item that's being brought up. That personal experiences tend to resonate more. When you are up there testifying, you'll start, your 3 minutes will begin, and when you have 1 minute left, you'll hear this little beep that kind of warns you that you have 60 seconds left. So, if you hadn't made your most important point yet, that would be the time to pivot and make sure that your strongest argument is made before you wrap up. And keep in mind that legislators may ask you questions, and so you can answer comfortably with whatever you can answer if you feel comfortable, and if you don't feel comfortable, you can say so. And then the committee chairperson will normally thank you, and then you'll be free to go back to your seat. So, beyond testifying at the legislature and watching online, what can you do? With whatever issue you care about, of course, in our case, reproductive rights, we encourage you to educate yourself, educate your friends and family, neighbors, fellow constituents. We have a landslide of resources for you if you want more information on a specific bill or specific nuance of our issue. Of course, vote, not just in presidential election years, not just in gubernatorial years, but in all local elections as well. We know how important those are. And then advocate, meet with your elected official, organize meetings, events in your community, and we are here to help you do all of that. And finally, this is sort of we've compiled some of what we think are some of the most helpful resources when tracking the legislature or tracking what happens here at the Capitol. We've, of course, have our website where Blake mentioned you'll find, starting tomorrow, our bill tracker and our agenda. And then there are some links that, again, when you get this PowerPoint, you get the recording, you'll have access to these hyperlinks, and you'll get to play around with Texas Legislature online.
All right. Thanks, Blake and Alexa. I'm going to ask you to stick around for the Q&A. So, like I said before, we are everyone's on mute because with this many people on the line, it often gets very noisy very easily. So we're asking you to type your questions in the chat function on the webinar. So we have a couple that have already been submitted. Someone asked about the House rep who often votes against anti-abortion laws or bills when they hit the floor of the House. That representative is Sarah Davis, who's a Republican, represents the West University area. And Representative Davis believes very strongly in medical privacy and not interfering in the doctor-patient relationship, which is essentially what most of these anti-abortion bills do. And no other Republican at this time votes against these bills when they are taken to vote on the floor of the House and the Senate. We also had a question about contacting how you know when and whether to contact your elected representatives. So in Texas, at the Texas legislature, you have one representative and one senator. And if you go to that Texas legislature online, on the front page in that little shaded box on the right-hand side, there's a handy tool where you can enter your address and it'll tell you who represents you at the legislature. And those folks, we will typically send out alerts through our email list and also often through our social media accounts, telling you it's time to call your rep or email your rep or come to the Capitol and testify against a bill when the time comes. If you are looking at our bill tracker at prochoicetexas.org and you see a bill that affects you personally or you personally would like to speak out about, we would love for you to do that. And we are here as a resource for you to give you guidance or even accompany you to speak to your lawmakers. Personal stories often have a great effect. And if you have a personal story to share or just want to make your voice heard and need some assistance with that, please let us know. There was also a really great question about bringing copies when you testify at a committee hearing. So you can also submit written testimony, and there are often multiple copies that the committees require. That number is not one consistent number per committee or between the House and the Senate. So we try and find out from the clerk or from the committee chair how many copies they're requiring in advance, and we'll let you know in those alerts. Our staff is almost always on hand. If you find one of us and you are worried about making copies, we will find a way to make copies for you. You can always submit written testimony as well if you're unable to speak. I'm going to let Blake add to.
Oh, I was just going to add that written testimony isn't required. You can come and speak and not worry about having any copies of your testimony to provide. But if you have written testimony you want to provide to the committee, let us know and we'll try to figure out what the right number of copies is. But there's no requirement to have a written piece to go along with your testimony before the committee.
Yeah. Generally, if you just want to err on the side of caution, if you make 20 copies, that should be more than adequate to provide to the committee. But like I said, sometimes it varies from committee chair to committee chair how many copies you need to bring. All right. What other questions do we have? Anyone else want to submit their question? Okay. Town halls. So town halls are often members will have their own town halls, and from time to time, and organizations like NARAL Pro-Choice Texas will be planning some events such as town halls down the line, and those are just publicized as they occur. Most of your reps, all the ones that I know of, will have an email list where they send communications to their constituents, and I would recommend, contacting your lawmakers and getting on their email list so that you get notifications if they do have any public events where you can come and meet them and give them your input.
Even if you disagree.
Even if you disagree with them, as Blake said. Especially if you disagree with them. They need to hear from you. All right. Any other questions? Well, we really appreciate you all taking time out of your evening. Oh, okay. Have you ever seen a legislator change positions after elected? I'm going to defer to Blake on that one.
Same.
That's a good question. I've certainly seen legislators be less convinced or forceful about specific pieces of legislation without really admitting they've changed their entire position, which is just to say that our input and your input to them has an effect on how they vote and what they prioritize and what bills ultimately become law. So it's important, especially those personal stories, to say how these bills affect you and your family really make a difference, because oftentimes they are really ignorant of people's real experiences, especially when it comes to abortion and other healthcare kinds of issues. So I think education to them is always a good thing, and that's the only way to change someone's mind.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We are going to send out the recording, and we will also send out a little survey so you can give us feedback And we want to hear from you about your experience this evening, what other topics you'd like to hear. And as always, we are available if you have questions. Our contact information is up on the screen. And we would love to hear from you. And if you are part of a group and you'd like us to come speak to your group, of course, please contact us. Thanks and have a wonderful evening.